we were just doing, honestly, I look back at those times and I think, maybe my brother and I were really crazy about going to, Detroit back then and being, the only Windsor kids at 5 a.m. Perhaps we shouldn't have, done some of the parties we did because they were probably really dangerous, but we didn't think about this. We were just really just going for it. We just felt that this was something completely different than what was being offered in Detroit at the time, or even anywhere when I was traveling around a little bit. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to define ourselves and give people an experience, something that, was very important. We were trying to use different locations every time and create a moment, a location that didn't exist the moment before the party began and ceased to exist the moment the party finished, and that it was only something that became a memory, And it's also why I still am quite adamant about not recording or even streaming some of my shows right now. It's there's a very physicalness to the experience of music, and without getting too much into the future idea, all the technologies that we have today to bring people together are amazing if they are used to bring people together in a physical location. But if they're just used to, connect people that always remain separate, I think it's a little bit disappointing.
Okay, well, we'll come to the future in a bit, but in your life is kind of, there are 3 sort of chapters which are very regionally based, really, which was then from moving from Windsor / Detroit to New York, which then took you to Berlin. Just tell us a bit about your time in New York and how important that was to where you are.
I don't really remember. It was like one hell of a year. I think everybody, especially anyone who wants to tap into a bit of their creativity, should spend 1 year in Brooklyn, New York, in that area. It's incredibly dynamic and incredibly fast-paced. But what did happen there was that I reconnected to a bunch of people who, funny enough, were from the Midwest United States and Canada, that I found out later had been, at these dark Plastic Man parties, and I didn't meet them because it was so dark and there was no lights that nobody met anybody, and had been inspired by that experience. And Magda, Troy Pierce, John Geiser, Jesse Heartthrob, pretty much everybody on my team were there at different points. And we found ourselves in New York together, partying and talking about these times. And I found that, they were, they had progressed to a point where they were really interested in music and wanted to be, were DJing or making things, and their original inspiration of what I had done kind of invigorated me and re-inspired me, and when we just started to become, I guess, a gang, so that's what New York gave us. And at that point, we all decided that we wanted to do something really tight together, but that New York wasn't the place, and unfortunately at that point America wasn't the place. And I'd been looking around, Magda had been looking around, and to us Berlin was the correct place. I was flying back and forth over the Atlantic, for weeks, every week for 8 years, and I was getting a little bit tired. We went, Magda and I sat there the day we left New York. I went back to record a Plastic Man album back in Canada, and I said, I'm not going back to Canada unless I know I'm going somewhere else. And she said, okay, go back, and I'll meet you in Berlin in 6 months. And that was another re-beginning, I think, of the success of Minus and what we've been able to do, because it brought all those different inspirations and connections that had kind of organically grown together, even without us knowing, over 10 years, together for the first time in a very inspiring place and very closely connected to the scene that we were interested in.
I think one of the things that makes you very different to a lot of artists is you've always built things like you did with the plant and the labels, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, Richie stops them. And you then move on to a whole new chapter, and you've always been very brave at that. Tell us a bit about what that is.
I have a very, very short attention span, and then I get bored very fast. So this is why I play the way I do now. But yeah, I don't think everything should continue forever. There's a certain moment that things connect to people. And it's an art form in recognizing when that moment is and when it's coming and when it's past. And, that comes on a creative level and a business level. John Acquaviva and I, after Plus 8 was working, we started a distribution company, and we helped people like Stickman and Cabinet Records and a whole bunch of, Terrence Parker, Kelly Hand, we had a huge company. If it wasn't high 6 digits, it was nearly into 7 digits of how many records we were pressing a year.
Was it the pressure of that made you wanted to stop? Or?
Well, that was exciting. We're pressing so many records that we decided to buy a record pressing plant. So then we became the owners and operators of one of the only record pressing plants left in Canada for a while. But it became so much to handle that it started to kind of become a weight on our shoulders about and distract us from how much we loved music. It became more about business, and people who know me, it's I can't just turn my I have a business and a musical hat on probably all the time, but it was like I had this lead weight business cap on that was sinking over my head, and I couldn't see music anymore. And it's also a challenge. Plus 8 was a label that had a certain moment and a certain time when it was very, very busy, and then in 1998 it didn't seem that relevant, and I had other ideas, and it seemed interesting to start another creative journey for a label called Minus, and I don't know how long that's going to last either. It's. They run as, my things, I have lots of projects going on. They're businesses, of course. They have to, kind of function. It doesn't mean they have to make money. They just have to somehow function. And sometimes it makes sense to have those, and sometimes it doesn't. But it's usually from a creative decision of whether those need to happen or not a business decision. If it's a good creative decision, I believe in the end it's probably a good business decision. And again, a good business decision doesn't mean it brings in X amount of dollars. It could be a good, promotional thing. It could be a good marketing thing, or it could just be, Minus was just a cool thing to do, to try my own ideas again. Having full control over the way the label looked, and getting back down to writing, drawing little label designs and being part of the whole process. That's what we do. That's what I do. That's what inspires me.
At which point did and I'm going to use the word minimal, but not in a musical sense. At which point did the aesthetic of minimal really start to take over your life? I remember you bought, was it a fire station you bought in Windsor?
Yeah.
And I remember walking into this place, and at that time...
It's not very minimal, though.
But the way you decored the place was... I'd never seen anything like it at the time. And it kind of makes me think it was the starting point of your sort of minimal design and the whole aesthetic of what you do, visual aesthetic of...
Yeah, I can't say that it goes in every aspect of my life perfectly, but I don't know, there's... how much stuff do we need? Do we need, I'm going to try not to go into the future here, but
nearly there.
We need to find balance in one's life, and we only have so many hours in the day, and so many hands and toes and fingers. We can't use everything all the time. So, the aesthetic of my house was stripped down, my music has, I hope, the bare essentials, nothing more, nothing less, and that balance is, I believe, what we're all trying to find within our lives, and I'm trying to find it in all the areas of things I do.
At which point did technology become a big part of your musical career? You said at one point...
Since sitting there looking at my dad playing with cool stuff that was going around and around and making strange noises, My dad gave me a cassette recorder, an old reel-to-reel, and I could record, and play back my voice and turn it backwards, and that turned into a cassette tape, which I can kind of pull apart, and then a 4-track. So, and when even further, when I was in Windsor, as a 10-year-old with no friends, because I just moved there, and I had nothing else to do except to play with things that didn't talk back to me, So I think since that time,
But I heard you talking earlier you know, technology has become a big part of your career, and I want to talk a bit about how you started to get into product design and stuff like that. But it's still, for a lot of people, it is just about the music, whereas for you, technology has always been, I think, as important as the music.
Yeah, for sure. I hope, I hope when people come to a show and I'm playing, that it's, people can get on the dance floor and freak out and dance and have maybe, I don't know if epiphany is a great word, but, we were talking about this artist, Anish Kapoor. He makes these crazy sculptures, and they're really sometimes hard to understand how he did it. And he's really interested in this moment he calls the fuck you moment. So you walk into a room and you're just like, later on you understand how he did it, but there's a moment where you don't understand, and you just take in that moment as something, not from this planet. And that moment is the fuck you moment. And I hope that, besides all the little things I'm using, or Tractor or Twitter or this and that, blah, 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 that people have that moment when they're, on the dance floor listening to one of my sets,
And at which point or which piece of equipment was it that you think made you a better DJ? Or do you think that's not the case at any point?
What, Tractor, so I don't have to beat match anymore?
Well, you used to get pretty wrecked when you were DJing. There was the odd mix that used to...
Well, yeah, but I don't remember those odd mixes that I didn't make. I only remember the good ones.
But talk to us about getting into...
Yeah, well, but again, like on that, like, DJing isn't beat matching. DJing is beyond that. It's a feeling. It's a way. A number of different things come together. Music, the intensity of the lights, the people next to you, the sweat in the room, and this creates the moment. Yeah.
Do you feel you've been given much more freedom by what's happened in the last 10 years due to these products as a DJ?
Yeah, for sure. I think, I remember being in high school and watching some of my friends. They were playing guitars and standing on stage being a band, and I was like, man, I could never do that. There's no way. I couldn't play. I played saxophone, but I sucked. It wasn't my calling. But I was really, really good at computers, and suddenly I found out that I didn't have to know how to play notes or even know a difference between a C and a D, but as long as I kind of heard something that sounded cool for me and I can manipulate this technology, I could do really cool things and affect myself and affect other people. And so once I realized that, and even, and this probably has relevance later, when I was 13, 14, I spent a lot of time by myself talking to other people online. Someone talked about this the other day. There was these crazy modems which had 300 baud, and I used to go on after midnight because I had to pay phone bills, and after midnight was cheaper, and I would sit there and talk and download, a game that took 3 days to download, and just communicate with people. And so always, my communication with other people, my connection to other people, and and was always through electronics, and that was just how it came to be. When I opened my Christmas presents, there was presents that it was from me and my dad. It was some weird sound toy or something remote controlled or something that definitely needed batteries.
How much has your father helped you in doing some of these product designs? I mean, over the years, there's a whole raft of companies and things that you've created. Has your father helped you at all in physically coming up with ideas?
Yeah, my dad's been a great sounding board. Sometimes he doesn't understand, well, what I'm trying to say, and then sometimes he goes off on a tangent and starts talking about transistors and capacitors, and I have no idea what he's talking about. But when we find a good moment, we've been able to do some really important things for my creative development. I think one of the main moments was, he was doing modifications for some things in the studio in the Plastic Man days, but just minor things. But I met the guys from Allen and Heath, and they had this great mixer called the Zone 62, and I was taking some boxes out with controllers to control some other things, MIDI controllers, and it was only really sitting down with my dad, saying, well, Dad, these knobs, you know, they change the EQ, but I don't need to change the EQ. Can you take the wire out and something and plug it into something else so it, you know, goes out and, you know, connects to my computer? Like, I don't honestly understand exactly all the semantics of it, but I understand that there's a voltage there, and we should be able to grab that voltage and send it somewhere. And my dad understands which components need to go in between that to make it happen, you know. And we're sitting in a place now that, you know, I don't use turntables anymore because I'm able to use a controller that sends my movements into the computer, and it allows me to be physically creative with technology. And that's only available to me now in some ways because my dad and I ripped a mixer apart and changed some of those knobs and wired it to something that it wasn't supposed to be wired to. And without my dad at that point, you know, who would have I turned to? I would have just had to be like everybody else and this is status quo. You can't do this because it doesn't exist. But, you know, John had a credit card, and we had an idea, so we did a label. There was no manual, we just did it. It wasn't right or wrong, there was no failure or success, it was just, let's see what happens. And, you know, we may have blown up the mixer if we plugged it in wrong, but my dad knew what he was doing, I thought I knew what I was doing, and something happened, you know.
I mean, we talked a bit before this about a lot of what has been discussed here in the last few days, and you talk about the journey. You know, you've already been on one hell of a journey from the pressing plant, from using vinyl to not using vinyl, to working with Native, Allen and Heath, Pacemaker, all these products. Where do you see we are on this journey of music and technology? We're going into the future now.
Oh, cool. You know, it's. That's a hard question to say, where are we? You know, we're exactly the same place as we were 10, 20 years ago. You know, electronic music was electronically created music. There was all these possibilities. There was this future you're trying to reach, but you hope you never reached it because that's the end destination. And I'm not ready to be at the end destination yet. I just want to feel that there's a history behind me and things that have been done, and then there's things that haven't been done. And, you know, somehow we try to connect, you know, the things that we understand and perhaps some of the things that have been done in different ways, that it becomes a new thing, you know. It's a little bit like the if we're going into the future, the Twitter thing, you know, which is, well, present. You know, we have this technology now that connects Tractor, which is, you know, an off-the-shelf program that I use as DJing. It, you know, it knows what tracks I'm playing when I'm playing them, and then you have this silly application called Twitter that people use for really dumb things, but that people are already connected to, that can send out information, very small pieces of information, very fast. So we took those two old technologies and threw something in between, and didn't reinvent the wheel, but, you know, we gave people a way of getting new information out of what I'm doing. And that's really exciting for me because that's a creative use of technology. Not only am I using the technology to do something different while I'm there, but now people can, you know, have a little magnifying glass in there to see what I'm doing, and perhaps that will inspire them to do something else, or to try and redo what I do, or learn about music. You know, isn't that what we're here? Maybe we're not, you know, okay, everyone's talking about how we sell music, but isn't the point to, like, let people know about new music that they've never heard before? You know, and I hope I'm playing a lot of music that people don't know. Now they can know it, and I think that's really cool. That's what we always wanted as an independent record label when we started Plus 8. It wasn't X dollar. It was like, hey, we think we're doing something cool. You know, we just wanted, when someone called from England and said, we want 500 records, it wasn't the 500 records. We're like, wow, someone just called us from Manchester. That's fucking cool. You know?
Do you think electronic music is still futuristic? Do you think it still sounds futuristic?
On a good day, yeah.
I mean, the music you're putting out, for instance, presumably you still feel that that's futuristic.
Yeah, I think electronic music has always more possibilities of sounding futuristic, because it's usually where the development is that other types of music use to try and modify their music now. You know, there's not much changes into guitars or flutes or whatever. It's usually them plugging into a piece of electronic gear that's been developed to create and modulate electronic frequencies that we use in electronic music.